Hello, everyone. So I will be introducing Surya Nehra. Surya is a senior completing his bachelor's degree in computer engineering and his master's degree in electrical engineering. The research he is presenting tonight was born out of a passion for the medical applications of machine learning. Please welcome Surya Nehra.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be presenting tonight the results of some research I've been doing regarding the forecasting of mosquito-borne disease using transfer learning. And we'll get into some of the more technical terms during the talk. But I'd like to begin with an image. I submit for your consideration the Humble Mosquito. I would have put an actual picture of a mosquito on the screen, but they're really gross, and I don't think any of us want to look at one. Now, the mosquito plays host to a broad array of diseases, including malaria, dengue, yellow fever, West Nile virus, and Zika, just to name a few. In the 20th century alone, malaria accounted for 150 to 300 million deaths. That's about 2 to 5% of all people who died during that time. And while prevention efforts have done much to mitigate the severity of mosquito-borne disease, even today, these illnesses claim over 1 million lives annually, with most of these deaths being concentrated in the regions of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. In these regions, climatological and socioeconomic factors converge to make a kind of perfect storm for the propagation of mosquito-borne disease. And as the last 2 years have shown us, disease forecasting is an important tool of disease mitigation, enabling more effective allocation of resources in resource-scarce environments. However, the same lack of resources that hampers public health efforts in these regions also makes robust data collection extremely difficult. As a result, building effective disease forecast models for these areas can be especially challenging. So this leads to a question: how can we go about building better models for regions of interest when we simply don't have a lot of data? Well, what if we had more data, but it was simply from a different region entirely? Say, for instance, I wanted to build a malaria forecast model for some region in India, but I didn't have a lot of data from there. Could I use the fact that I have some more data from a region in Peru to supplement the small amount of data I have from India? In other words, can I use the fact that I have more data from a geographically disparate location to build a better forecast model for my region of interest? This is the question that lies at the heart of the research I've conducted. And so, before we move forward, I want to get into a little discussion of my experimental methods. For all the experiments I conducted, I used a special kind of neural network called an LSTM, that stands for long short-term memory. I won't get too much into the theory behind neural networks because I want you all to stay awake for the duration of the talk. But the core idea behind neural networks is the imitation of a human brain, mathematically. In pretty much any neural network, we provide input data to the first layer, and it's processed, transformed, and has features extracted by layers in the middle of the model. Finally, all these extracted and transformed features converge at the output and are used to make some sort of determination by the model. As we provide the model more data, it becomes better at extracting features. In other words, the neural network learns. It may sound a bit complicated, but if you want to put it in very simple mathematical terms, you can think of a neural network as just a system of equations where we're slightly modifying the parameters in order to make the equations better fit our data set. And so the applications of neural networks have actually been quite broad, and they've had a lot of success in a variety of different problems. For example, we can train a neural network to identify a cat from a dog based on an image. Or maybe we can give it some English text and have it translate into French. Or, relevant to our context, maybe we can give it some data on disease cases in the last few months and make a prediction about the following month. In this context, the LSTM models that we're employing are especially well suited to this problem because they are especially designed to store information about previous inputs. For the data we are using malaria data from Angul, India, dengue data from Bangkok, Thailand, Denpasar, Indonesia, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Iquitos, Peru, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. And so before I move forward, I just want to point out that all these data sources are actually very geographically distant from each other. And so there's a strong variance in the climatological conditions between these regions. And in fact, the two closest points on this map are actually over 1,000 miles apart. And so in order to make use of data from different locations in order to develop a model for our target region, we're using a technique called transfer learning. And the intuition behind transfer learning is that if I pre-train a model using data from some kind of similar task, I can get better results on my target task. In essence, you can think about it as using data from some distant location as a way of priming the model for our target region. And so we might want to build a model for dengue data from Rio de Janeiro, but we pre-train using data from Angul in India. By exposing the model to the data from Angul, we're giving it an opportunity to learn something about the dynamics of a mosquito-borne disease, so that it doesn't go into the training process with the data from Rio de Janeiro with no experience at all. So essentially, you can think of it as trying to give the model a head start in the learning process via transfer learning. And so now we can get into some of the results that I obtained. So as for the experimental process, what I did was I built a baseline model for each region without transfer learning, and then I built several transfer learning models for each one. And presented here is the difference in the percent error between the best transfer learning model and the baseline model for each region. And we can observe in 5 out of the 6 cases a decrease in the error of the transfer learning model versus the baseline model. In other words, this represents an improvement in the performance of the model simply by engaging in the transfer learning process. So what this proves is that even when using geographically very disparate data sources, for example, India and Puerto Rico, we can actually obtain statistically significant improvement in the performance of the models without a very technologically sophisticated technique. And so sort of digging into the results a little more, we see I put in this table the source regions that yielded the greatest improvement in performance for each target region. And so the reason for why the transfer learning process works better in some cases than others, or as we saw in this slide, not at all in the case of Denpasar, in which case the performance is actually 28% worse in the best case. More research is necessary. But possible candidates for why it works in some cases and not others include climatological similarity because of the dependence of mosquito life cycles on factors like temperature and humidity, or also population dynamics between regions. But while more investigation is required, the key takeaway here is that with a relatively simple technique, we can actually see statistically significant improvements in model performance. And so, sort of getting away from the technical side of things, in the time I have left, I want to talk to you all a bit about why I decided to study this problem in the first place. As you might know, many mosquito-borne illnesses are designated as neglected tropical diseases in conversations about global health. And if you haven't heard that term before, what it really is just a nice way of saying that, historically speaking, we haven't really cared about these diseases because they only affect poor people. And in many areas of research, including disease forecasting, that historical neglect continues. And so, while this study has been an interesting computational exercise, there's really a deeper question underlying it. How long can we afford to keep neglecting these diseases simply because they don't affect us? Especially when we clearly have proof that we have the technological capability to combat them more effectively. At what point will our apathy implicate us in the unnecessary suffering of untold millions of people? The tools to alleviate and perhaps even eradicate that suffering exist. I've shown that. We need only the will to use them. Thank you all very much.